Oh, wait. Let's unpack this. Batman, the Dark Knight, he's everywhere, right?
Absolutely. Movies, comics,
The
games.
action figures, the works. And on the surface, look, he's just a human. No super speed, no flying, none of that.
Right. No powers.
Yet he's one of the most enduring, fascinating characters out there. A human, yeah, but like nothing like us, really.
Not at all.
He's devoted his entire life, trained body and mind to these, unbelievable extremes, has all this money, but lives like a monk,
Uh-huh.
and does it all dressed like a giant bat. It's quite the image.
It is. It's a compelling paradox, isn't it?
Right.
That mix of, well, relatable humanity pushed to an impossible peak, combined with this almost mythical presentation.
Yeah, it really connects with people.
It resonates deeply.
Totally. So what is it about that specific, almost contradictory combination that grabs us? Is it the sheer dedication, the choice he made? Or is there something, deeper going on?
That's what we want to dig into today.
Exactly. We've pulled together a stack of sources, articles, research, some philosophical writings that use the world of Batman, use Gotham, as a way to explore some genuinely profound philosophical questions.
Think of this deep dive as maybe a shortcut, a way to get your head around some big, challenging ideas, but seen through the, let's say, gritty, rain-slicked streets of Gotham City.
Yeah, a philosophical shortcut through Gotham. We're going to try and extract the most important nuggets of knowledge from all this material we've gathered.
See how philosophy can maybe illuminate the Caped Crusader and his, let's be honest, often bonkers world.
Right, and we're going to tackle some huge questions, like why exactly does Batman refuse to kill villains like the Joker, even when it seems like, the only logical thing?
The cost seems so high otherwise.
What kind of ethical compass is he really following? How does his whole vigilante mission square with ideas about society, about the state?
Yeah, and what can philosophy tell us about what's going on inside the Joker's head? That's always a big one.
Oh, yeah. What does it even mean to be Batman? And surprisingly, perhaps, what kind of wisdom can we get from characters like Alfred Pennyworth?
Yeah, he's more than just a butler.
Yeah.
Get ready for some genuine aha moments, hopefully. This isn't just like an academic thing.
No, it's about connecting these masked heroes and these ancient thinkers in ways that might just change how you look at both.
Should be interesting.
All right, let's jump right into the heart of the darkness. The question that I think has haunted Batman fans forever: why doesn't he just kill the Joker? I mean, our sources really highlight this. The Joker commits what one philosopher actually calls triple sick crimes.
Yeah, that's quite a phrase.
He's the definition of a revolving door inmate at Arkham, right?
Right.
You just know he's going to escape and take more lives. Think about the sheer body count tied to this one decision not to kill him.
It's the ultimate moral tightrope he walks. And characters within the stories challenge him on it constantly.
Like Gordon sometimes.
Gordon, definitely. But especially Jason Todd, the second Robin. He directly challenges Batman on this. Jason, after his own resurrection, famously asks something like, ignoring everything else, why is the Joker still alive after all the graves he's filled, all the friends he's crippled?
Oof. That's a devastating question.
It is.
And it sounds like a really practical argument, doesn't it? Just look at the consequences.
It absolutely does. And that brings us straight into some fundamental ethical frameworks. One big one is utilitarianism.
Right. The greatest good for the greatest number.
Exactly. Utilitarianism says the morality of an action is determined only by its consequences. So, from a strict utilitarian viewpoint, killing the Joker saves countless future victims. It maximizes the good consequences.
So it's the morally correct action from that perspective.
Pretty much, yeah. Characters like Jason Todd or even Hush, they make this exact utilitarian case to Batman. And, sometimes Batman himself seems to use this logic, like when he risks Robin's life to save a whole bunch of refugees from Joker gas.
Okay, but Batman's usual line is something like, if I kill, I'm no better than they are. That feels different.
Completely different. That stance lines up much more with deontology.
Which is more about rules.
Yeah, exactly. Deontology judges the morality of an act based on the act itself, based on rules or duties, regardless of the consequences. Killing is wrong, period. The ends don't justify the means.
So the action itself has to be okay.
Right. When Batman says killing crosses a line he can't come back from, he's basically stating a deontological rule. The act of killing is intrinsically wrong for him, no matter if it saves lives down the line.
Okay, so you've got consequence-based ethics versus rule-based ethics. Where does that famous thought experiment, the trolley problem, fit in? Divert the trolley, kill one to save five.
Yes. Philippa Foot and Judith Jarvis Thompson's classic.
Yeah.
It really forces you to weigh consequences against direct action, right? You could switch the tracks, save 5 innocent people, but you'd be actively causing the death of 1 innocent person.
And most people find that really hard, the direct action part.
They do, even if it saves more lives. But our sources make a really critical point about how the Joker situation is different from the classic trolley problem.
How so?
Well, it's absolutely crucial. In the standard trolley case, everyone involved is morally innocent. The people on both tracks are just there.
Right. Victims of circumstance.
Exactly. But with the Joker, the one person you could potentially kill is the actively vicious agent who put the 5 or 50 or 500 innocent people in danger in the first place.
Ah, okay. That's a big difference.
Huge. This isn't about sacrificing an innocent bystander. It's about stopping the person who is causing the danger. The sources argue this distinction actually strengthens the utilitarian, the consequentialist argument for killing the Joker compared to the standard trolley problem.
PC's not innocent.
Not even close. Why should innocent victims have to sacrifice their lives for the sake of the person actively trying to kill them? The sources suggest it would be, well, morally absurd to protect the Joker's right to life at the expense of his victims.
Wow. Okay, so even using these ethical frameworks, the argument for killing him seems pretty strong. But Batman still doesn't do it.
He doesn't. And this pushes us beyond just looking at rules or consequences and makes us look at the person himself, at his character.
Okay.
This is the realm of virtue ethics. Thinkers like Plato, Aristotle, more recently Alasdair MacIntyre. Virtue ethics asks a different question. What kind of person should I be?
Right. It's less about a checklist or calculation.
Exactly. It's more about cultivating moral character,
Yeah.
developing virtues.
Like courage, justice, wisdom, temperance, that sort of thing.
Precisely. And Aristotle believed you become just by doing just acts, brave by doing brave acts. It's about learning by doing. You develop virtue through practice, often by imitating people you see as morally good.
Moral exemplars.
Right. And virtues are often seen as the mean between extremes, Aristotle's classic example. Courage isn't being cowardly that's a deficiency, or being reckless that's an excess. It's the balanced point in between.
Okay, that makes sense. So how does Batman's intense hatred of criminals fit into this virtue framework? Can hatred actually be virtuous? That sounds wrong.
Yeah, it sounds wrong, but this is a really provocative idea from the sources. They argue that virtuous people don't just love good, they also have to hate evil.
Okay.
So hating evildoers and maybe even feeling a degree of, say, satisfaction when they face deserved consequences, when they suffer for what they did, that can be seen as a manifestation of loving good.
Uh-huh.
And Batman fits this description perfectly, doesn't he? He despises criminals. He wants to see them suffer for their deeds. Directed at true vice, this hatred, the source argues, can be seen as a virtuous disposition.
That really flips the script on how we usually think about hatred. But living a life consumed by that kind of hatred, even if it's virtuous, does that lead to a good life for Batman himself?
And that's the crucial counterpoint the sources raise. Is this virtuous hatred ultimately in Batman's own self-interest? The answer seems to be a clear no.
Right, it takes over everything.
It consumes him entirely. It denies him a normal life, family, friends, simple pleasures, hobbies. It leads to that constant brooding, the isolation. So a virtuous life focused on building good character doesn't automatically guarantee eudaimonia, that Greek idea of flourishing, which includes things like meaningful relationships and well-being.
So he can be virtuous but not flourishing.
Exactly. Batman is presented as an example of a life potentially consumed with hatred, even virtuous hatred that, goes poorly in some really fundamental human ways. His virtue comes at an enormous personal cost.
That's a heavy thought. His dedication might be virtuous, but it might also be kind of self-destructive.
It seems that way.
Speaking of costs, let's talk about the broader impact of Bruce Wayne's choices, specifically from that utilitarian perspective again.
Okay, yeah. This is where philosopher Peter Singer comes into the picture, particularly his famous work on global poverty and our moral obligations.
Famine, affluence, and morality.
That's the one. His core principle is pretty stark. If you can prevent something bad from happening without sacrificing anything of comparable moral importance, you have a moral obligation to do it.
And for Bruce Wayne, with his absolutely staggering wealth, resources, time, unique skills.
Well, the challenge from Singer's viewpoint is pretty clear, isn't it? Is fighting crime, specifically in Gotham City, the most good Bruce could possibly achieve with those extraordinary resources?
Probably not, globally speaking.
From a strict, impartial utilitarian perspective, probably not. Bruce's vast wealth could potentially save far more lives, orders of magnitude more, by funding global health initiatives, clean water projects, combating poverty on a massive scale, compared to focusing it all on crime in one city, even a troubled one like Gotham.
That's a serious gut punch to the whole premise of Batman, isn't it?
It really is. It forces a tough question from that utilitarian angle. It also brings up the idea of supererogatory acts.
Actions that are good, but kind of above and beyond the call of duty.
Exactly. Is being Batman supererogatory? Singer would likely argue that if Bruce is serious about applying utilitarian logic, like risking Robin to save many, he should apply that same logic to his own life and resources. He should focus on maximizing overall good globally, even if that means giving up the cowl.
Wow. So, from a certain philosophical angle, maybe Bruce Wayne's moral duty isn't to be Batman at all. That's unsettling.
It challenges the narrative we're used to.
Let's pivot a bit and think about Batman's place within society itself. Gotham. It's often shown as a place where things have just fundamentally broken down.
Yeah, it frequently looks a lot like the state of nature as described by philosopher Thomas Hobbes in Leviathan.
The war of all against all.
Precisely. Hobbes painted this grim picture of life without effective government authority, chaotic, driven by fear, where life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Hobbes argued that to get order, people have to give up some freedom to a powerful sovereign who can enforce laws.
And Gotham feels like that social contract is, pretty frayed. Or broken.
Definitely. The sources mention the corrupt police force under Commissioner Loeb and Arnold Flass in Batman. Year one, where the state's own agents are part of the problem, not the solution.
Right. The system itself is corrupt.
They even use the real-world analogy of the breakdown and citizen responses in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina to illustrate how society can fracture when its structures fail.
So in that kind of environment.
Figures like Batman emerge. And this highlights a fundamental tension, especially when you compare Batman to someone like Superman.
How so?
Superman is often portrayed, particularly in works like Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, as an agent of the state. His use of force is framed as licensed, legitimate, often explicitly aligned with the American way or government interests.
He works within the system or for it?
Largely, yes.
Oh.
But Batman is the opposite.
Totally outside the law.
Exactly.
Hey.
Batman's actions are not licensed or legitimate in the eyes of the state. He operates outside the law. Technically, he is a criminal. He directly challenges the state's widely accepted monopoly on the legitimate use of violence.
That idea from Max Weber, right? That only the state gets to use force legitimately.
Right. The state claims that right exclusively, and Batman basically says, well, not always. Not when you fail.
So Batman is a criminal, disrupting the state's monopoly, but in a city that feels like Hobbes' state of nature, he's actually providing a kind of order the state can't.
Yeah, that's the core paradox.
Oh.
In The Dark Knight Returns, Superman sides with the government against Batman, seeing him as a dangerous, destabilizing force. Batman, meanwhile, understands he's breaking the law, but believes his actions are necessary because the state has failed to provide basic safety and order.
It's complicated.
Very. And this is where Jim Gordon is absolutely key. Gordon, representing the legitimate state force, the GCPD, works with Batman despite his illegitimacy.
He uses him.
He trusts Batman to provide order where the police can't or won't. And Batman, crucially, respects the system enough to hand criminals over to Gordon and the legal process. He acknowledges the police as the proper authority, even if it's flawed. He sees Gordon as maybe the exception.
It's this really weird symbiotic relationship built on necessity.
Exactly. It's a complex dance on the edge of the law.
And he's not like some villains who want, pure anarchy or are trying to achieve political change through violence.
Right. Unlike someone like Anarchy, who uses violence for explicit political goals, Bruce draws a line. His violence is primarily about restoring a basic level of order, preventing harm, stopping crimes in progress. It's not about implementing his own political agenda or acting as judge, jury, and executioner.
Okay, where does the Joker fit into this picture of society and order? What's his goal?
The Joker's motivation isn't really political in a conventional sense. It's profoundly anti-order. He seems to rail against any structure, any system, particularly what he sees as a boring and restrictive order.
He just wants chaos.
Well, it's more than that, according to the sources. He doesn't just want chaos for its own sake. He seems to need Batman's rigid adherence to order, his rules, to define his own chaotic existence against.
Ah, the duality.
Yes. Their duality isn't just personal, it's a philosophical clash about the fundamental nature of society order versus chaos. As the Joker actually tells Batman in one story, something like, I never kept count of the bodies, but you did, and I love you for it.
Wow.
He needs Batman's obsession with rules in order to make his own rule-breaking meaningful, to give a contrast.
That relationship dynamic is fascinating and terrifying. Let's try and dig into the Joker's mind itself. The sources we looked at generally seem to assume he's genuinely insane, right? Not just evil or eccentric.
Yes, the assumption is often that he's suffering from profound mental conditions.
Hmm.
They point to things like how he treats people using Barbara Gordon in The Killing Joke purely as an object, a means to an end as a classic psychotic attitude. His actions aren't just villainous, they seem to stem from a deeply fractured perception of reality.
But if he's truly insane, how does that affect the whole question of his moral responsibility? Does he have free will? Can we blame him?
That's a huge philosophical tangle. Can we hold someone fully responsible if their actions are dictated by a mental illness that inhibits rational thought or impulse control? It's really murky.
Yep.
The sources bring in philosopher Harry Frankfurt here, and his ideas about free will potentially coexisting with determinism.
Okay, how does that work?
Well, Frankfurt used these thought experiments. He suggested that even if you were somehow predetermined to do something, if you wanted to do it, if the action aligned with your will, your desires, then you acted freely. What matters isn't whether you could have done otherwise, but whether the choice was genuinely yours.
Okay, so let's say Batman was somehow predetermined to throw a batarang at the Joker, but he chose to do it because he really wanted to stop him. Then he acted freely, according to Frankfurt.
Essentially, yes, that's the idea. The action matches the will. The tricky part, though, is the resulting epistemological problem. How can we ever truly know if someone's action was a free choice aligned with their genuine will? Especially if they're mentally ill. We can't get inside their head.
Right, we can only see the action.
Exactly.
So, like, applying this framework to the Joker, what's the conclusion?
The sources, using this kind of Frankfurtian lens, tend to conclude that the Joker is likely not morally responsible in the standard sense. His profound insanity seems to prevent him from forming what Frankfurt called second-order desires.
Desires about desires.
Yeah, like the ability to reflect on your impulses and decide whether you want to have those impulses or act on them. The Joker seems to just act purely on his lunatic impulses without the capacity to reflect on them or genuinely will himself to act differently. He lacks that necessary level of self-awareness and control.
That's a really challenging conclusion for philosophy, but also just for the characters in the story.
It really is.
Yeah.
Because if he's not morally responsible in the way we usually think about it, what does that mean for Batman? What are Batman's or Gotham's obligations towards a genuinely insane person capable of such horror?
Yeah, what do? Pity, continued hatred. Just keep locking him up.
Is it permissible to let him die if the opportunity arises, given the harm he causes, regardless of his responsibility? His status as Batman's arch-nemesis seems to stem not just from the terrible things he does, but from the terrifying reality of what he is, this force of pure chaos arising from a broken mind, maybe beyond the reach of traditional morality.
It makes their endless conflict feel even more tragic somehow.
Definitely.
Let's shift gears again. Let's think about the actual experience of being Batman. Bruce Wayne consciously created this persona, right? Back in year one.
Right. He felt something was missing after all his training. Revenge wasn't enough. Justice needed a symbol, and then the bat crashed through the window.
A symbol arrives.
Yeah, it provided that symbol of fear he needed, completing the identity. It gave him an authentic conscience, something beyond simple vengeance or just fulfilling his parents' expectations. He chose to become the bat.
Okay, and this brings up that classic philosophical question, often tied to Thomas Nagel. What is it like to be Batman?
Exactly. This is straight out of Nagel's famous essay, What Is It Like to Be a Bat? Nagel argued for the importance of the subjective character of conscious experience, the idea that there's something it is like to be a particular organism, and that subjective feeling can't be fully captured just by describing its physical properties or its behaviors.
Like you can describe how a bat uses echolocation scientifically.
But you can't know what that feels like from the bat's perspective, subjectively.
Okay, so applying that to Batman. You can do what Batman does. You could train obsessively, learn martial arts, build gadgets.
You could mimic the actions?
Yeah, you can't truly know what it's like to be him. Is that the idea?
That's pretty much it, because you don't share his unique subjective reality. You don't have his specific physical conditioning pushed to peak human limits, his endurance.
His deep psychological trauma, the burden of that vow he made.
His absolute isolation, his wealth, his specific life situation. We can maybe perform the actions, but we can't step into the consciousness because our underlying physiology and life circumstances are fundamentally different.
It's like Nagel used the bad example because echolocation is so alien to us. Batman's human, but
But his humanity is pushed so far beyond typical human experience, physically, psychologically, situationally, that his subjective reality as Batman is likely unknowable to us in a deep way. He's human, but his experience of being that human is profoundly different.
that's a powerful idea. He's human, but his experience of humanity might be alien to us. What about the word Batman itself? Is it a name strictly referring to Bruce Wayne, or is it more like a job title, a role?
Yeah, the sources highlight this as a bit of a philosophical puzzle. Is Batman a rigid proper name that only refers to Bruce Wayne? Or is it more like a description or a role that someone fills?
Because other people have been Batman.
Exactly. The
Yeah.
existence of multiple Robins, Dick Grayson becoming Batman for a time, Terry McGinnis as Batman in the future, it complicates things. It leans towards Batman being a role, a mantle. This connects briefly to Wittgenstein's idea of family resemblance. We use general terms like game or maybe even Batman, not because they have one single strict definition that fits every instance.
But because different instances share overlapping similarities, like members of a family.
Right. There's no single essential feature, just strands of resemblance. So Batman becomes a strange term, as one source puts it, when you try to pin down one absolute meaning.
It makes you think about how we use language to define identity and roles. Okay, let's turn to someone absolutely essential to Bruce Wayne and the whole Bat operation. Someone who offers a very different philosophical perspective, Alfred Pennyworth.
Ah, Alfred. Yes. The bedrock of the Bat family, isn't he? With that unwavering loyalty.
Totally.
The sources use philosopher Søren Kierkegaard to frame Alfred's perspective in a really interesting way. They contrast Alfred as the Knight of Faith with Batman as the Knight of Infinite Resignation.
Whoa, okay. That sounds deep. What does that mean in simpler terms?
Okay, let's break it down. For Alfred, his sense of justice isn't some abstract, grand, maybe unattainable ideal like Batman's quest for total justice in Gotham. It's much more concrete, personal.
It's his duty to the Waynes.
Exactly. His duty to the Wayne family, rooted in respect, kindness, love. It's a lifelong commitment described as almost a blood oath. It's specific, deeply personal. Batman, on the other hand, is seen as the Knight of Infinite Resignation because he's resigned himself to pursuing an impossible ideal justice for everyone, all the time, relying on spectacular public deeds.
He's given up on a normal life for this impossible quest.
Right. And Alfred, as the Knight of Faith, he acts by virtue of the absurd.
The absurd.
It's a Kierkegaardian idea, famously illustrated by Abraham, being willing to sacrifice Isaac at God's command, doing something that seems completely irrational, against all reason, purely out of faith.
Oh.
Alfred maintains his faith in Bruce and the mission, despite Bruce's flaws, his self-destructive tendencies, and the seemingly impossible, maybe even absurd nature of his whole crusade.
His commitment is his faith.
Yes, his unwavering commitment is his form of love, his ethical belief. His pain, the sources suggest, comes from watching Bruce constantly strive for that unreachable, ideal justice, trapped in his infinite resignation while Alfred holds on to faith.
That's a beautiful, much quieter kind of philosophy compared to Batman's dramatic gestures. The sources also draw connections between Alfred and Taoism.
Yes, drawing on thinkers like Lao Tzu and Chuang Tzu. Taoism emphasizes finding balance, the interplay of opposing forces, yin and yang, dark and light, hard and soft.
The Tao, the way.
Exactly. The Tao is the natural way of the universe, and you follow it best by being flexible, yielding, finding harmony. Alfred seems to embody this by constantly trying to find balance for Bruce. He sees Bruce as dangerously yang-dominated, too harsh, bitter, paranoid.
Too much yang, not enough yin.
Pretty much. And recent character moments mentioned in the sources like Bruce adopting Tim Drake or showing tenderness towards Selena Wayne's baby suggest Bruce might finally be starting to move toward a more balanced state, perhaps partly due to Alfred's quiet influence.
Taoism also has a different take on death, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
Chuang Tzu, for instance, viewed death not as some terrible end to be feared, but as a natural transformation, just part of the endless cycle of nature. He even questioned why we cling so desperately to life, comparing it to like a lost child refusing to go home. It's about acceptance.
Accepting the flow.
Right. And interestingly, the sources note that Dick Grayson, Nightwing, often seems to have a better grasp of this kind of Taoist acceptance of mortality than Bruce ever does.
And Alfred's actions themselves. They fit that Taoist principle of Wei Wu Wei, right?
Yeah,
Action without action.
perfect example. Knowing when not to act directly, achieving results indirectly, almost effortlessly. Alfred provides subtle aid, quiet wisdom, anticipating needs without making a big show of it. Like the skilled butcher from that famous Taoist story who finds the spaces between the joints and cuts effortlessly.
Day works in the background.
Exactly. He's essential, but he works in the shadow, not seeking glory. As Lao Tzu supposedly said, sages never do great things. That is why they can fulfill their greatness. Alfred patiently guides Bruce, tries to steer him toward balance, like water shaving mountains over time, not through force, but through persistence and knowing when to yield, when to just be there.
That's a perfect comparison. Alfred is the quiet, balancing force that keeps the whole chaotic enterprise from collapsing. Okay, so finally, let's bring it all back to us. The big question. Given all this philosophy swirling around him, can a fictional character like Batman actually be a moral guide for us? Can he serve as a moral exemplar?
It's a fair question and a common objection. How could we possibly learn how to live from someone so unrealistic, so wealthy, so physically beyond us? His specific feats are impossible for regular people.
Right, I can't glide off a roof.
Exactly. But the sources offer a compelling counterargument. They point out that many of our traditional historical moral exemplars, think figures like Buddha, Gandhi, maybe certain saints, the versions we learn from are often highly idealized, sometimes almost mythical versions of the real people.
We learn from the story as much as the history.
Precisely. We learn from the idealized narrative of their virtues, their struggles, not necessarily the messy, complex historical reality. The embellishments, the legends, they don't necessarily negate their power to inspire moral growth.
So it's not about imitating the person literally, but about the ideal presented in the story.
That's the idea. Fiction, like the Batman stories, can provide really vivid depictions of virtues. Courage in the face of overwhelming fear, relentless dedication to a cause, a deep commitment to justice, however flawed, resilience. The argument is that we can improve ourselves by studying and seeking to imitate the character traits and virtues that Batman embodies.
Even if we can't replicate his specific abilities, his wealth, or his, rooftop acrobatics.
Exactly. We can be inspired by his persistence, his integrity in his own way, his refusal to give up, and try to apply those qualities, courage, dedication, a sense of justice, in our own much more mundane lives.
That's a great way to think about it. You can be inspired by his dedication and courage without needing a bat suit or $1 billion. It makes looking up to fictional characters feel a little more philosophically sound.
It definitely offers a powerful lens for understanding how stories shape us and how we learn about what it means to strive for a good life, even through characters who are larger than life.
Well, we've definitely gone on a deep dive today, haven't we? Using the sharp tools of philosophy to try and cut through the complexities of the whole Batman universe.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack.
We've seen how these big questions about killing, justice, identity, society breaking down, the nature of the mind, how they connect the Dark Knight to centuries of philosophical thought, from ancient Greeks like Aristotle and Plato,
Through modern giants like Kant and Hobbes.
to more contemporary thinkers like Singer, Frankfurt, Nagel, Kierkegaard, Wittgenstein, all kind of mediated through the chaos of the Joker and the quiet wisdom of Alfred.
And the real insight here, I think, isn't just about understanding Batman better, though hopefully we've done that too. It's seeing how these profound ideas, played out in a story many of us know so well, can help us grapple with those same difficult choices and paradoxes in our own lives.
Yeah, like how do you balance consequences versus rules in your own decisions? How do you define who you are, find something authentic to dedicate yourself to?
What are your responsibilities to the wider world, and how do you even begin to meet them? These aren't just questions for billionaires in capes.
Not at all. Perhaps the most valuable takeaway, then, isn't finding the definitive philosophical answer to Batman's dilemmas, because maybe there isn't one. But maybe it's realizing that the struggle for justice, for identity, for meaning, it isn't always found in the most spectacular battles or the most rigid rules.
Sometimes, as Alfred seems to quietly demonstrate, it's found in that unwavering commitment, in seeking balance, and maybe in maintaining a little bit of faith, even when things seem absurd.
Yeah. It's definitely something for you to think about as you navigate your own world. Figure out your own version of the deep dive into what really matters.